A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. That's a great quote by John C. Maxwell and a great quote to kick off this 25th day in this 30-day live stream about intrapreneurship. Today, we focus on how to gain executive support and sponsorship. My name is Jürgen Morse. I'm a coach, a strategic advisor, and a consultant. And like I said, let's kick it off today. Why is that a great quote by John C. Maxwell? Well, no matter where you start in an organization, no matter where you find yourself in a large organization or in a multinational, you will always need the support of somebody else. And so we expect a lot of times that leaders that they know the way, that they actually go the way, and that they show the way. And it's a great quote because it works in two directions. You expect it a lot of times from your own leaders and from your own executives, but it's also something that you will have to learn to do as an entrepreneur. Because the moment you stop going the way and showing the way, chances are your entrepreneurial efforts will also end there. And especially when you are getting more and more refined and you're growing as an entrepreneur and you start also building your own entrepreneurial team, this quote actually becomes really, really important. So think about it. What we expect from somebody else, we should always do ourselves as well. Now, in the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about growing as an entrepreneur from smaller projects up to really big masterpieces of projects with whole teams of entrepreneurship. And no matter whether you start in the beginning or whether you start with these huge projects or you end up with these huge projects, you will always need to gain executive support and sponsorship in a certain way. For the smaller project, this will be always a little bit more limited in comparison to what you typically have for the larger project. Now, why is this so important to get executive support and sponsorship? Depending on where you are in the organization and depending what you do inside the organization, when you're just at the beginning of your career, sometimes it might not be your executive. If I look back, for instance, at the time when I started with my very first project, when it was a small project, it was typically not the vice president where I needed to report to or whose support I actually needed. It was my operations manager or plant manager at the time that needed to support me. But as soon as the project got a little bigger and the funding got a little bit bigger, then also, of course, the vice president had to step in. And you will see that they will look at certain elements and certain aspects of this entrepreneurial endeavor that you want to go from a different angle through a different set of goggles or spectacles because they are at a different position in in the organization. Now, what kind of perspectives do they see when they look through their glasses? They look a lot of times at a lot more organizational goals. We discussed already before that it's so important this week to align your entrepreneurial efforts, especially when they get bigger and bigger and bigger, with the organizational goals, targets, and vision over the long period of time. So what that's also typically what they watch, what they guard to see from, is your product somehow contributing to that? Is there a way to connect to that? And sometimes when you are with them and discussing with them, what you see as an opposition, they're just trying to figure out from how can I make this fit if the fit is not necessarily very perfect in the beginning. So don't see them immediately as an enemy who don't try to help you. No, they need to understand really well to see how am I going to defend this as well, especially as the budgets get really bigger and bigger. It is really important. And then I already discussed this also before, as your projects are growing, the impact that you're achieving is sometimes beyond your own unit, and you go maybe across silos, or you go even throughout the whole organization, or maybe you go into the customers and the external organization. Well, at that point in time, you need the backing as well of the executives, because if something goes wrong, and as long as you're an entrepreneur, not everything you do actually works out fine. You need, of course, that backup so it doesn't blow up in your mind, so that you don't bear the responsibility on your own, and that you have somebody who has your back when, yeah, a discussion with another VP in a silo emerges, or with a customer, or even with a customer. So it is really important to have this executive support and sponsorship on board. Um, they will always look at the potential risks. They will always look at your projects from a certain risk management. How can I? So make sure, when we talked about this before about the risk register, make sure that you have it, how to tackle it, because they have a certain concern about the risk and the resource allocation. And you will see it. You, as a starting person, may have a very small budget of a couple of thousand euros where you can decide your own. Your boss has a bigger budget, and as you go up the ladder, the budgets typically raise up to the couple of thousands, 10,000s, 100,000, millions, and seven, eight, nine figures, depending on the size of the company that you're working for and the level that a certain person is actually in and responsible for. So make sure that you have, when you go into discussion, the risks really very, very clear. Now, we already talked this in the area when we discussed how do we build a business case, how we build a case, how do we get the stakeholders on board. And one of the stakeholders was typically, or were typically, the executive teams. Make sure that when you come with your case, you have a very clear value proposition. Your business case should be very clear. There should be tangible assets in there. Make it practical as well. Sometimes when you especially look at very new technology, especially in this digital age, I've noticed that sometimes you need to have a vision. It is not there yet to immediately come up with very clear examples, because you still have to do, for instance, a certain development as well. Come up with similarities. You will always find a similar kind of technology, a similar step in the past that can help explain what you're after, what you're going to do. Sometimes the technology that you are after in your company was already used for another company. So you can, for instance, work with these typical sentences. Well, we will be the Uber of, or we will be the Facebook of. This is something. These similarities sometimes make it easier to understand without necessarily having to spend a lot of time in explaining to an executive the whole technology. Now, there is also a risk in that, and from my own experience, I learned that you have executives that grew up as true technologically minded people. Typically, these are engineers, and they want to go really, really deep and understand the true aspects of a technology. Now, don't do this when you are explaining your case. Tell them, look, I will explain my technology to a certain extent, but when I explain my business case, I will not spend most of my time in explaining to you the technology. If you want to understand the technology, the details, put or ask for a separate meeting on that, because then it will only be the technology. You can talk about all kinds of different aspects, but you don't have to cram into a meeting of an hour. Otherwise, you get to the point where you're talking for 55 minutes about the technology and all the potential things that can go wrong with the technology, and you're talking about 5% about all the rest of your business case. And you will see that this is not a healthy situation. So make sure that the time reserved to discuss a business case has a certain amount of time for technology, but don't take it too far. And when you have an executive that really has an interest in technology, ask for another mission where we say, if you have that amount, please, I will even do it early in the morning or late at night, but I will make the time for you to talk about technology. But please listen to the whole case, to the whole value proposition, and not let just have a talk about the technology. Come up, similar with the business case, come up with data and evidence, whether it's statistics, whether it's studies, whether it's experiences, whether it's trends from somewhere else. Try to bring in, and in the best cases, of course, when your competitor is doing it, bring those into your case. When you bring your business case, build those data, use as much um, tangible data, quantitative data that you can bring. But like I said, sometimes you actually have to rely on qualitative, and don't use data. I always say don't over data, because to convince somebody, you can put a lot of data on a table. But at a certain point in time, you've reached a point where the balance between the actual data that you have and convincing somebody, there's so much data on the table. Putting an additional set of data on the table is, let's say, 1% additional foundation. But this 1% sometimes doesn't bring what you're looking for. And don't forget the other aspect, like the emotional elements, the financial elements, they are equally important to all the statistics and the data that you can have towards the technology. Don't forget that also when you step towards an executive. Now, everything we told about the business case, everything we told before about all kinds of aspects are also valid here. So, what is also important? Communication strategies. When you message, make sure you tailor the message um, to an executive, and don't use the message that you actually were using to your own employees, for instance. Make sure that it's very tailored to what they are looking for, what they are looking at, to the games that they have to play, because they play in a different league. Other things are important there. Sometimes it's politics that are playing. So give them tools, give them also assets or ammunition that can help them to defend your project when they actually have to go up as well, because everybody has somehow a boss to talk to. Even the CEO, he has to report to, on the one hand side, society, and on the other hand side, the shareholders, for instance. So you always have to explain. So make sure that when you bring your message, in this message is also the ammunition that this executive can use to defend you and to bring the project forward. Like the business case, develop some kind of elevator pitch, brief, persuasive. We already discussed about how you build this and about these details in the business case, so I'm not going to go into much detail here. When you're looking at engagement, because that is part of the communication aspect, try to build a relationship with executives, and try to do it also on a more personal level. Don't try to build a relationship only when you need them for a certain project, because then at a certain point in time, like in regular life, if somebody only thinks you are important when they need something of you, this is something that you pretty quickly see. You understand this, and after a while say, "From I know why you're coming. You need something from me." No, try to give them, or try to build a relationship that is just more than, yeah, now I need funding again. It can be a lot more. You can discuss a lot more different topics with them. You can spend time when there is an event somewhere, whether it's more a personal event, whether you can have a drink with those persons. Also have make time for them at those point in time, and don't just walk by them at those events or those occasions, because basically they're also just people who like to have fun and a good laugh, or like a good joke with a beer or with a glass of wine. So don't forget that, build a true relationship. And building a relationship means also that when things go wrong, that you bring that message as well. Don't wait till everything exploded. No, try to bring this message also when it goes wrong. And that brings me to regular updates and feedback. When you have their support, make sure you give them a certain feedback on a regular basis. Some people like very frequent feedback, others don't. But also try to assess, depending on who this person is, whether they like frequent feedback or not, whether they like informal feedback or more formal feedback. But also try to assess from how does that influence the mood of my executive. Some executives are rather nervous when things start to go wrong. Um, and there it is sometimes better to um, wait a little bit longer and see from, okay, especially in the beginning of a project where a lot could go wrong. So choose your moments, because you don't need a nervous executive knocking at your door every day as well, because it's not good for the executive, it's not good for you, it's not good for the team, it's not good for the innovation. So try to look at that as well. So try to assess from, okay, how is my executive? Is he somebody, or is she somebody that gets really nervous when things are going wrong? Because this is really important in the beginning, because in the beginning, when people don't know you, you have to build your name, you have to build your brand, you have to build you have to build the trust in you. And when they notice that when something goes wrong, you take care of it and you deliver your project most of the time, and when something really goes wrong, they are informed, and you give them also at those points in time the tool to explain this to those people who actually signed off on the budget. Then the trust they will have in you will also make sure that those regular updates, that feedback that you will give them, can diminish. In the beginning, it is maybe, or the first years, you might have to really give weekly feedback to some persons. But as they trust you and they know they can build on you and they can rely on you when it's good, but also when it's going bad, then you will see that this frequency definitely drops, because there are other people who definitely do not do that. And you need this trust. If you want to grow as an entrepreneur, to a real successful entrepreneur, big impact, you need this trust, and not just from one executive, but from a whole group of executives. Because when the project is getting bigger, more people will be involved in the projects that you bring. So when you build this, you can build sponsorships, and sponsorships can be more than just that. They help you develop. And when somebody decides to sponsor you, it can be on a project, but also somebody can say from, I recognize myself a lot in that person. I wanna sponsor this guy. I want to be his mentor. Mentorship is basically also coming from that. So this is look also for that. If you have a very special bond or a special connection with a certain point, then don't also do not be afraid to ask for that. To say, from, do you want to be my mentor? Do you want to be my sponsor? Also, when you admire something in a certain executive, you can do exactly the same thing. When, for instance, I moved to Germany into this really innovative unit, the senior vice president that we had at the time, he was a really entrepreneurial guy, and I really admired him. And we had such a good connection that also on a very personal level, we hit it off. And let me give you some examples of it. At a certain point in time, there was this. We had an internal training. It was about 20 people, and it was offsite somewhere. It was 2 days, and he had a session in the evening telling about what entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship as well inside BSF could mean and could do. And I was, yeah, the only person from his unit in there. The others were all there, and at the end, we all had a chance to talk about. Um, or to ask him something. And at a certain point, I waited till the last person so that everybody had the chance to ask questions and um, ask things that they wanted to do. And then it was my opportunity, and I used the opportunity to thank him, because I remember the very first day when I was in his office to apply for the job at the time. Um, he asked me one, two, three questions really quickly, and at the end he said, "From Jurgen, I never had an engineer in my group. I never had a Belgian from an operational unit in my group, so I'm going to take a risk with you." And I said, "Yeah, I will not I will make sure that you will not be disappointed in that." And I reminded him of that, and I thanked him for that chance and for what he said at that point in time. And I said that you gave me the biggest chance of my life. You gave me the greatest job of my life until that point, and I will always be in your debt and grateful for that. And he got really emotional at that point in time. He even shed a tear. I never saw him do that. And in public, he said, "Well, you are not a vice president. You're not a senior vice president yet, but I'm convinced that I have I would have no problem if your career would rocket, and one day you would become my boss." And that was, yeah, this feedback, getting that feedback from somebody that mentors you, that sponsors you, is, yeah, breathtaking, and it's something that sticks into your mind forever. And months later, we were signing a deal in the United States. Um, and it was in San Diego, and we signed the deal. And the next day, we had to drive back to the airport in Los Angeles. We did a shopping trip because I had to do a lot of kind of shopping, and he took me to all kind of places, and we had a really nice talk and discussion. And where our relationship started as I was an employee and he was senior vice president, he became my mentor and sponsor, and this grew into a great friendship. So it can be also on a very personal level. So if you have this click with somebody, build on that relationship as well. And it helped me because whenever I had a problem, and I had a lot of issues, or I had some very big problems at a certain point in time, because um, there was a project that I had been running for a while, but I took it over, and I talked about this project. I think it was the thermoelectrics project, and there was the new development or the new technology. I always questioned when I received it from my predecessor, and I set up, also because they asked, somebody from the top executive team asked me, "Are you really assess it really really well?" So we involved some other people that had more knowledge in this area, and we found out days before we actually would commit to a huge deal that the technology was just a false measurement, that the company that we were involved with, they didn't the people there didn't know it. They didn't do it on purpose. And it also took us a huge team, an external team as well, to find this out. And so I had to bring him that message. And he supported me. We brought it to the top executive team. We explained it to the top executive team, and nor he nor me nor myself were ever really punished for that, because we didn't know, but we acted and we said, okay, we have to pull this plug. Although everybody agreed, until this, even the CEO agreed on signing the deal, we said, no, we will not sign it because there's something wrong. And we got really a lot of respect for that as well. And I remember that year in the annual feedback, he said to me, yeah, Jürgen, there's one thing that I want to tell you, and it's now long enough so I can tell and talk about it as well. If you would have been from another nationality and you would not have been the person you are from Belgium, the truth might never have come out. And that was the second time that we looked at each other, and I think we both had tears in the eyes. And those are stories that stick to you as an intrapreneur, as an entrepreneur. How you and it shows you how you can build sponsorship and a relationship as an entrepreneur with executives if you really have this good connection. And I also had, because the last thing that I want to talk about, I also had executives where for some reason I could never connect with. So you have the two extremes that I just showed you, and most of them are somewhere in between. But I also had one or two where no matter what I tried, I could not connect with. There was some things personally, I think, I don't know, from two sides that didn't work out. But the only thing you can do even then is to always keep your emotions in guard. Always make sure that you are the bigger person in the room, even when you would expect that the executive has to do it. Make sure that you, as an entrepreneur, no matter what happens, no matter what's towards your employees, no matter what it's towards the unions, no matter what's towards colleagues, team, executives, always make sure that you are the bigger person in the room. um, and if they try to provoke you, don't go in that game, because if you go in that game, you lose, because they are in a higher position. But when you keep your cool and when you are the bigger person, everybody else in that room will also see from he did not let provoke himself. And sometimes when you are really believing in a project, when you are really fighting for a project, as an entrepreneur, when you're really passionate about a project, that can be a really big challenge. But remember, the chain of command, if it turns against you as an entrepreneur, it jeopardizes everything that you have built in trust, in track record, in the person you are. So be very, very aware of that. And the second thing is, when you have these persons that are on the other side of the extremity or that are somewhere in between, it also sometimes means that you have to compromise and be ready. I already talked about that when we talked about a business case, when we talked about other things. Be ready to compromise. And this compromise can be anything, but judge for yourself when you look as an entrepreneur on the project and say, okay, even if I have to delay it for a year, because that can be a compromise, I will have had the impact that I'm looking for. So that is a compromise that's sometimes easier to make. Sometimes they ask you to change a certain thing where you know the impact will be a lot less, or the value for the company will be a lot less. But then you can also compromise the fact that, yeah, but I had my first win, we introduced it, and people will see and learn that there is a lot more value behind it. And maybe as a second step, we can then bring it forward. But don't compromise on anything. If you know that it jeopardizes the project as it is, and whatever comes out of it will, in the long run, not deliver the value for the company, because that's what you're after, for the company or for the customer or for the employees, then you should have the guts to say, no, here I keep my stand. We either do it or we don't. And if they don't then decide to do not do it, accept it with pride, because you were not ready to compromise on the basics what you do as an entrepreneur. And that brings me a little bit to the end of a topic that is more about relationships and communication, um, but also where you have to grow. It is something that you have to build. So when you start your career as an entrepreneur, um, it is something that you start building. Is trust is something that you build. They have this nice saying that it comes on foot and it goes by horse. Uh, well, trust, building relationships with executives, doing projects with executives, getting this mentorship, it takes time. It is something that you build along the way. But to become this truly successful entrepreneur with a lot of impact, you will actually need it. Now, that's my task for you for today is think about a project, or where you said, okay, here I may have not been the bigger person where an executive provoked me, because those are learning moments. And also think about, how am I in building up my relationships towards executives? Do I have a sponsor? Do I have a mentor? Did I ever ask anybody for that? If I look at those two extremes that I talked about, from where you have a really good relationship with and somebody where it's somehow whatever you do, it doesn't fit. Do I have two examples of that? Yes or no? Did I ever meet somebody in those two categories? Because once you have them, they are anchor points for yourself as a person. That would it be for today. And tomorrow we will talk about scaling your entrepreneurial efforts, because the more advanced you get in all the skills and everything that I discussed so far, the more projects you can do as an entrepreneur, meaning you can also scale your effort. When I did my masterpiece, there were so many projects. In the past, I would do one and focus on that. And now that I have maybe 50 different projects running on the short term, mid term, long term, how can you scale your entrepreneurial efforts? It will definitely mean that you will move to an entrepreneurial team, but there's a lot more in scaling those efforts. But that's something that we talk about. So I hope to see you tomorrow. It will be a Saturday, to talk about scaling of your entrepreneurial efforts. Thank you and see you tomorrow.